Hey guys, Dark Humility here. You can always catch me at twitch.tv/Dark Humility for 6 to 7 days a week of Diablo 2 action, Project Diablo 2, D2R, LOD. We do it all. We make guides for all. We do all sorts of challenges and all sorts of gameplay and all sorts of builds live on stream. So catch me there. Guys, today we have something special. I am proud to announce Dark Humility's starter lineup, the recommended starter builds for Project Diablo 2. Now, one thing I should mention is before we get into my starter lineup and go over exactly why I think the builds belong there and what this is and whatnot and what does it mean, I should just let you guys know this is part of our Season 4 Project Diablo 2 late game tier list, and that this is a starter lineup that is fully updated and loaded for Season 4. It may change in future seasons, it could even change with future patches. But it is part of our late game tier list if you guys haven't seen it already. This is all for late game mapping, single target, Ubers, and everything else. We already made a video about all of the rest of this, all the late game tiers for all the builds. And we did so much testing to verify all this, mostly all in the late game, vast majority of the testing. And it's also worth noting that in the early game, we also have a trifecta of power listed here. In general, for the early game, you're looking for builds with high mobility, big area of effect, and or magic or physical type damage. A combination of these factors does tend to make a build stronger in the early game. And if you have more of these factors, or at least one of these factors that is highly pronounced, like really high mobility on a sorceress, it'll tend to be better in the early game. Another thing to note is that in general, these builds are all like you could do almost any build in Project Diablo 2. You can almost start out with anything you want. It is possible to start out with anything. Is it necessarily the best to start out with anything? No, but it is possible to start out with almost any of these builds in Project Diablo 2 because they have made it viable. However, I get asked this all the time. I am constantly being bombarded with questions asking me, what should I start with? What is a good starter build? What should I start out with in Project Diablo 2? And then the question I always ask is, what class do you want to play? So it really does depend on what class you want to play. It also depends on kind of what farming areas, LOD farming areas you want to farm early game. Just as a disclaimer, I have not done nearly as much testing in early game, but from watching other content and from compiling data from my own season starts throughout the seasons, and from compiling an understanding of what most people start in general and how strong these starting approaches are, just in general, I've been able to create this starter lineup for you guys to give you guys at least a general idea of how strong a build you are starting out will be. So I didn't make any kind of tiers for these, which is one thing I should start out by saying because they're all very close in effectiveness in early game. It really just depends on what you want to farm. Like for instance, farming Travancore with a Barbarian is going to be insanely good on those builds, whereas maybe with a Necromancer you can go Chaos and Worldstone almost right from the get-go. So it just kind of depends on where you want to focus your farming at. Maybe you're better in a group as well, in the case of like having a lot of support abilities in the Warcry tree, or having Conviction on a Paladin, or just having summons. You might be better in a group, maybe to start mapping right away, or at least to run Chaos and Bale almost right from the beginning. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. Or like Freezing Arrow with like a secret cow level, destroying cows. Same thing with like Fire Druid. Um, it really just depends on what you're trying to do. So it's really hard to give like an overall starter rank for these builds. However, I do rank them, kind of give you guys a relative rank within the class itself, starting with number one down to whichever builds um, that I feel like would at least be decent for starting. I could include every build in the game and just rank its competence when it comes to starting out without much gear. Um, but I felt like it'd be better just to highlight the builds that I feel like are at least good for starting, versus just like all the builds that, including ones that might be really bad for starting. What makes a build good for starting, though, is this early game trifecta of power, which I mentioned just before: high mobility, big AoE, and or magic or physical type damage. Um, but what also makes it good, of course, is its ability to deal damage and to farm late nightmare hell areas, specifically LOD, or even to support immediately in group mapping scenarios without any gear. So that is what makes these builds good. You don't need a lot of gear or need hardly any gear at all. Maybe no gear. Can almost do it naked. That's usually the hallmark of a strong build. So all these builds here I consider to be pretty darn strong in the early game, and they all have strong farming methods and they all have strong farming means. Obviously, there's some that are stronger than others. The number one I have listed in each of these is what I would consider to be the top approach for each of the classes, but it really does also depend on what you're doing. So these are very rough relative rankings, and they're mostly relevant for solo gameplay, which is what I tried to focus on um, with these relative power rankings right here. So apparently I messed up one of the numbers there. GG. Um, but yeah, so that's mostly what I try to focus on, and it's really good stuff in general. So let's kind of get into it and kind of why I think each of these builds is really strong and kind of what each of these builds do. And then you guys can decide what to play in Project Diablo 2 Season 4 or maybe even future seasons. I don't see these rankings changing all that much. They've been very consistent throughout the seasons, like what starters tend to be pretty good, except for maybe a couple of new entries like Fist of the Heavens that kind of took over time, and maybe Summon, which kind of like has overtaken Bone as a dominant starter for a Necromancer. But there's a couple of differences for Season 4. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's just start talking about it. Once again, you can't really. The classes are in no particular order. They're literally just an order of um, how I have them here. Like just on the late game tier list for the late game mapping power single Uber tier list. Um, so don't read into it. Don't think that Sorceress is like a better starter than Druid, and Druid is a better starter than Amazon. They're all equal in this regard, which is why it's not like 1 to 30. It's 1 to 4, and then 1 to 3, etc. All right. Anyway, so for a Sorceress, Blizzard Ice Barrage is probably going to be your best choice. You can just farm so many awesome things, including a improved Indarial loot table in Season 4, Catacombs 3 and 4, which are now 85 areas, and Catacombs 2 even, which is at least an 80 area now. Just a lot of power you can get from that. You can also do Ancient Tunnels. But even better than that, you can do Mephisto, especially once you get the gear. It becomes a bit easier to do Mephisto. It's a little dangerous and hardcore before that gear. Travancore Blizzard Ice Barrage is really effective. And there's, of course, all kinds of things you can do. You can even pop clickables and lower cross. Blizzard Ice Barrage just has almost no obstacles to clearing all kinds of hell areas early on. You can even do like the Cal level. You can do almost whatever you want, and it's got high mobility, it's got high damage, even without lots of gear. It's just really, really solid. Just below that is the same element, which is a cold element. I'd say Frozen Orb used to be like the number one starter in previous seasons. However, it's kind of like the damage isn't insane anymore without a decent amount of plus skills. But once you get like anywhere like 25 plus or even 30 plus all skills on Frozen Orb, or at least level 30 Frozen Orb, it really starts to hit hard, and it's very reliable, and you can hit things from afar. It's very safe. Um, it even has improved range now, so just like Blizzard Ice Barrage, you can pretty much do all the same things with it, except it's It's right there. Damage is a little bit harder to apply. Right where you land it. You have to position very carefully for Frozen Orb. One good news though is you don't have to reposition as much as Blizzard Ice Barrage. You can kind of just sit there and just sweep the area clean, so you don't have to worry about the teleport penalty as much, because you can kind of just sit there and just snipe everything with Frozen Orb and destroy it, which is very effective stuff. In Season 4, lightning builds are even more effective as starters, mostly because you can get static field on a Act 3 mercenary, which is a very strong static field now. And you can even break lightning immunities with it. And you can further reduce lightning resistance. And the Act 3 mercenary has very good AI now as well, and will almost always apply it. If it is not already applied, it will apply that static field. It's very consistent. Lightning builds are going to be very strong when you start out for areas like the Pit and Chaos Sanctuary, which now has widened paths. In Chaos, I mean, sorry, not Chaos. In Arcane Sanctuary, you have specters, chests, everything that you could possibly want for runes, charms, gems, jewels, jewelry, worldstone shards, puzzle box chances are pretty high in there as well. You name it. Those ghosts have special loot tables. They can't drop armor or weapon items, so they can only drop certain items, which means that they're much more likely to drop those kinds of items. So farming Hell Arcane, there's no lightning immunes in it. There's only lightning immune archers in the Pit, which are not the most dense enemy, and they don't even always spawn in there. But you can help out with that static field mercenary. So it's a very effective farm to farm these kinds of areas with lightning characters. And lightning and chain lightning is arguably one of the best late game builds at the moment. However, it's a little more limited in the farming areas you can do in the early game, and some of them aren't necessarily the highest volume for like sets and uniques like bosses and Travancore and things like that. So I put it down a little bit in the tier list, but it's definitely a solid starter. Or I put it down a bit in the overall ranking for my starter lineup for the Sorceress. And then Combustion Fireball, which has always been a strong starter for a Sorceress. Uh, you can farm bosses with it just fine. Just to let you know, there's other fire builds you can use to farm bosses, like you can go like Firewall and Hydra and things like that as well. Like I said, there's a lot of things I don't put on here. I try to put the very best approaches though. Let me know, of course, if you feel like I missed anything. Um, I'll do my best with that though. But yeah, Combustion Fireball, really good stuff, really solid. You can farm Stony Tomb with it very easily. You can farm cows. You can farm bosses, and you can also farm like lower cross clickables, just like the ice builds. And you can even kill everything in Arcane except for the Hell Clans. So the Hell Clans are pretty dense, so I'd probably prefer a lightning build for that, especially with the changes. But yeah, it's going to be a solid build, solid starter build. You can also do like Maggot Layer as well, which is also all in 85 area as well as Combustion Fireball. There's a lot more you can do, of course, but that's about it. All right, let's get into the Druid. So Wind Druid's insane, especially if you can get Quetzalcoatl, which is not even a hard item to acquire early game. Get that Gust cooldown reduced, and it's pretty nutty. You can have really reliable teleport, which is really the key to Wind, Tornado, and Twister. So you can get it down to a 0.5 second cooldown pretty easily. If you use Quetzalcoatl early on, you can get it definitely very close to a 0.5 second cooldown, even with a lot of plus skills. And you can farm everything with it. Tornado, Twister, very strong abilities, even without skills now. With skills, they're also very strong abilities. They can kill almost anything. It's physical damage mostly. It also does cold damage. So yeah, physical damage is really good for starting out. Really good AoE and very good mobility on a Wind, Tornado, Twister, Druid. It's gonna be able to farm anything in the early game very effectively. Then we have summons, Ravens, Wolves, and Bears. This is pretty straightforward, but you really can't go wrong starting Summoner. If anything, it's like the easiest, least maintenance starter. Not necessarily going to be the most efficient, I would say, overall as a starter. It's very close though. It's very close, because summons are just super powerful, even without tons of plus skills. And the more plus skills you get, the more powerful they're going to be, even from the early game. They will destroy anything, and even in the late game, they can do all content. So Summoner is a very good choice for starting out. It's also one of my best choices, I'd say, for a new player, just overall, even out of all the classes, um, because it's so easy to learn, and you really don't have to do a lot. The animals will do most of the work for you, and as soon as you can get some source of applying amplified damage, such as like the Vile Husk or Gavel of Pain or something, on your Act 5 Mercenary, which is the best approach, um, you're going to be balling with that, no problem. All right, so Druid, Fire Druid. I was kind of agonizing about whether or not to even include Fire Druid. However, it is very effective, especially with some of the fissure improvements in the early game against cows, just like it is in LOD. Also, the Maggot Layer, very good with Molten Boulder, even more so maybe than and Volcano and Fissure. But all of these fire skills, when taken together, are very effective, even without a lot of plus skills. And there's definitely high level areas like Stony Tomb, uh, Maggot Layer, and Secret Cow level, which might be the easiest to access, that this build is actually really strong at. And you can get a decent gust cooldown reduction with this build as well, given that it is in the elemental tree, the more elemental skills that you get. So very, very strong approaches to starting out for the Druid. Let's go into Amazon. So this is definitely a up and coming starter build right here. I'd say overall, even out of all the classes, but it's been like this since season 2, probably maybe even season 1. Freezing Arrow has always been insane. It's so powerful for starting out. It's so safe. It freezes everything. Um, anything, it just pops monsters like nothing. The damage is just insane, even without crazy gear. Full map Venus set will make this even more insane, and it's not even. It's just a set. It's nothing like crazy. It's a crazy build. It's a crazy good starter, and it will destroy cows. It will absolutely eviscerate packs of cows. Hell cows, no problem. It's great starting farm for it. There's a lot of other decent starting farms as well. You can farm Travancore to a pretty strong degree with it. Uh, and you can farm the new catacombs, of course, just starting out. It's a little more challenging, though, because of the corridors. It's better to have, like, a character that can teleport, like with Frozen Orb or Blizzard for catacombs. But, man, there's just so many things you can do well. Like, you can almost even clean chaos with this as well. And it's going to also be great for starting out with group mapping to provide some of that crowd control. With Freezing Arrow, just freezing everything. It's really amazing. Really incredible, and you don't need a lot of expensive gear to make it work, which once again is a hallmark of all these builds, even to start out making that really powerful build. So Freezing Arrow is amazing stuff. It's just very powerful stuff. It's also very popular right now, so that can always be a little bit of a hit because when something is popular, the gear might be a little more expensive than normal. But that being said, it doesn't need gear, so that's the key. Keep in mind that you don't even need full Mavinas. You can even use Wizen Draw. Wizen Draw is just like a unique long battle bow. It'll make it insanely strong. So Freezing Arrow is going to be a great choice for starting out. My number 2 pick for the Amazon is Poison Plague Javelin. I've tried this myself as well, and man, it is really effective. You can play through the whole game as Poison Plague Javelin with like no plus skills whatsoever. Cheap items like Snake Cord, Venom Ward, even like Radamants, really easy to put together stuff will allow you to do a ton of damage. But even without those items, you will be able to clear the pit and hell no problem. And since it's poison damage, it's a pretty favorable element in a lot of areas. Once you get a bit more damage, Travancore becomes really easy as well. If you can get Pus Spitter on your Mercenary, it's going to be lower resist, and it's just really easy to kill stuff. It does a ton of damage, and the AoE is even bigger than ever now, so it has a lot of clear potential. I really like this ability, and it doesn't really require a lot of maintenance or a lot of gear. Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike has always been like one of the stronger starters for an Amazon, no matter what. Especially like in areas like the Pit and in Arcane, especially with the improved corridors since Season 3. So Lightning Strike is really good. It just does a lot of damage without a lot of maintenance. The mana cost isn't super brutal like Lightning Fury. Lightning Fury, I would argue, is stronger in the late game. Definitely a lot stronger in the late game, especially once you get more mana per kill and you get a lot of like high damaging gear. It scales really well, but Lightning Strike is really solid. It hits everything. You can farm the pit, you can farm Arcane, and once again with an Act 3 Mercenary, you don't even need items like Infinity or even Stormspire. All you need is an Act 3 Mercenary, and Static Field is at the ready. And of course, you can also have abilities like Charge Strike and Jab to supplement your damage, Lightning Strike. So just very solid damage. Of course, you can also swap to like a Vigor Bow if you want for more run speed. It's just very good, and it's also a solid, safe mapper as well, where all you have to do is kind of hit the first enemy, and then it hits everything. Um, so it's Lightning Strike is a very good starter build. Magic Arrow. So Magic Arrow might not be as fast as some of these other approaches. However, very cheap items and very cheap bows. I believe it's Mage Wrath is the bow for this one. Can give you a lot of plus skills to Magic Arrow very early on, and they're not very expensive items. And Magic Arrow is magic damage, and it's AoE, so it hits everything. And all you really need is like a Vigor or a Act 1 Mercenary. You can run around really fast and just pop things with this, and you can kill virtually everything in hell with the magic damage. So it's really solid, very effective. Maybe it lacks some clear speed relative to some of these others because of the lack of AoE. Maybe it's not quite as safe. But as my number 4 pick, I'd say it's a very solid starter for an Amazon, and it's very cheap and easy. Summon Valkyrie's Decoy. So this is a new one. As a starter compared to other summons, I wouldn't say it's super impressive. Once you get more gear, this is a very impressive summoner. Sorry, a starting build, but it only requires passive GCs to get going. You can maybe argue that passive GCs are going up in price because of this build. It's a lot stronger, I'd say, even in the late game, but I put it here as a potential started build because you can just have the Valkyries and the decoys kill everything for you, even if it's not the fastest approach, maybe compared to some of these other approaches, because you kind of have to lay down the summons and whatnot, and you have to take care of their damage. And ideally, you'd get like an Act 5 Mercenary for might early on, so it's not quite as easy as some of these other approaches to do the damage, but it's very safe and it's reliable for dealing damage. So that's why I put it on here. Very good stuff. Barbarian. Barbarian. All right. Oh, sorry, not Barbarian. Necromancer. Oh man, we almost skipped one of the most important starting classes. Necromancer is huge for starting. You can almost argue this is one of the most popular starting classes this season, probably the most popular starting classes this season. And if you want to play a Necromancer, it's no better time to do it. This number 1 here, my number 1 pick is incredible. Just going Skeleton Warriors, Mages, and Archers is going to be really good for starting out and very reliable and very easy. You just get Desecrate, and then you can just summon as many of these as you want. You can start out with a Might with an Act 5 Mercenary. You can even get Vigor Aura with a pretty cheap item, which is Kalan's Legacy. You can get full Trings early on. There's just so many cheap items you can get. Even like Graven Spine, just like a unique Bone Wand, will make you insanely strong. Undead Crown will make you insanely strong without much gear. They're very cheap, easy to find items um, that make this build really pop in the early game. And even without any of that, it can clear hell with no items virtually. Nothing. You can almost be totally naked. And it's reliable, it's pretty fast, and once you even get some items on them, it's very fast. You can clear anything. You can clear absolutely anything with it. Just get that amplified damage and just get all your skellies, and you're gonna be clearing everything. And with the mages, you don't even have to worry about immunities really. It's super strong in season 4. It's stronger than ever. If you want a strong starter approach, just overall, even out of all the classes, I can highly recommend that one. Just kind of like how I highly recommend maybe cold approaches on a sorceress, wind on a druid, and freezing arrow on an Amazon. This one is really good. All right, number 2, bone. Bone is really solid. Bone is a very solid approach. I have tried this myself, starting out as Bone, and it's really good. AoE mobility with Blood Warp, just like with summons. Of course, Blood Warp can be used to give you mobility on any Necromancer, which makes Necromancer a great starting class if that's what you want to do. And of course, you also have Golems for protection on a Bone Necro, because you can put all your spirit points into Golems after you level up all the Teeth, Bone Sphere, and Bone Spirit. But overall, there's so much damage that you can pump out. It's magic damage. It's AoE. You can destroy chaos with Teeth, even without a lot of plus skills. It's mostly all about faster cast rate and plus skills. If you can get a Bone Shade, especially, it's going to be incredible. But even before that, any source of plus skills or faster cast rate is going to help, especially getting to the 75 or even the 125 breakpoint. It's going to be nice. And even in the end game, it's a very strong build as well. So very strong, safe. The damage type is very good. You can clear pretty much everything. Very solid. Clay golems kind of do what the skeleton warriors, mages, and archers do, but a lot slower. They do more damage per golem, but there's just a lot less of them. And you really have to invest a ton of points into golems in order to make them really strong, which is definitely why they're a little bit further down here. But hey, they'll tank Travancore, they'll tank anything without hardly any skill investment. And really easy to get items like Karen Shard will be really good for this build as well. So look out for that one as well. Dark Pact Curse Support. So this is my last pick as a starter for a Necromancer. I have also started out as this build. It's just gotten stronger every season, and you can blow up cows with this, like no joke. Even with a lot of plus skills, you can slow them down with decrep, you can blind them, and you can just blow them up. You can use very strategic skills. Also, it's incredible if you go really hard on the curse tree, just in general, and you play as a curse support and mapping. You don't really use Dark Pact too much in a group. You would just use like curses, but it would be insanely good for a starting mapping team, or heck, even if you want to start dungeons within the first week, it becomes possible with curse support. So in general, the curse tree slash Dark Pact, very good starting approaches. Also, Dark Pact is magic damage, which once again, AoE magic damage can kill everything. It really struggles with bosses, but that's about it. Clearing cows with it, very effective. Clearing the pit, very effective. Um, the more density, the better as well. So take advantage of that density with the Dark Pact Necro. You can 100% start Dark Pact, no problem. I wouldn't say it's like one of the best starters, especially if you're playing solo. But if you're playing in a group, this might be one of the stronger ones for sure, if not the strongest approach on a Necromancer, besides maybe summons, because summons just tank everything too. So like summons are just amazing. It tanks. They Summons are almost invincible. Summons do tons of damage. Summons can kill every element. Summons require very little gear investment, which is why it's my number one pick. But hey, I mean, Dark Pact will be a solid approach. If you get a Dark Pact, if you get a Curse Necro on top of a Summon Necro in a map, look out. It's going to be an amazing setup. All right, so Barbarian here. Uh, we got Double Throw. Double Throw. Double Throw has almost always been the best starter in PD2. I don't ever remember when it wasn't. It's undergone some nerfs and then rebuffs, and it's just really strong. Overall, it's been nerfed a little bit, and that does hurt a little bit in the early game. But to be honest, the Barbarian doesn't have a lot of ultra strong approaches to start out with. It's very gear dependent. It's probably the most gear dependent class in Diablo 2. It always has been, even in Lord of Destruction, even with all of the developers' best efforts in PD2, which have been amazing efforts, don't get me wrong. It is a challenging starter build, starter character, just because you need gear in general to do damage with things like Whirlwind. You need at least something. Uh, yeah, you can make them work with like IK set and things like that, but some of that stuff is pretty rare. Some of those sets are harder to acquire versus like other sets like Alders, even maybe for a summon druid, for instance. It's even harder to acquire a full IK set because the IK armor is so rare. There are other things too that make it a little bit more difficult, such as being right in the fray, taking damage, so you actually need to be able to tank a bit. So it's definitely a little bit more of a challenging starter class in general. This is all for, of course, late game mapping power. But what I would say though is it's not hard to get decent throwing weapons. Throwing weapons, just any F spear, you can imbue it. Make sure your loot filter is showing those F spears. You can buy spears and imbue them. You can just find white ones on the ground and imbue them. You can craft spears pretty early on, and they're going to be pretty strong. Even without the craziest spears, you don't need the craziest spears for a throw barb to be very powerful. Throw barb actually can use very simple weapons. And once you get like at least just a non-eth lacerator or a wraithflight, you're hammering. Like it's super powerful. It's super powerful. It's a very strong build. But at any rate, it doesn't take too much. Blood crafts, hit power crafts. Just make use of all those. Make use of all of them. Pick up all those rare. Also, just pick up rare javelins and spears. It's very powerful. You don't have to worry about quantity. It will destroy everything. And once you can get some source of amp and maybe some negative physical damage reduction, it becomes one of the strongest builds in the game. So double throw is no joke, even from the get-go, and will be fairly very effective, very effective. And of course, you can also go support along with double throw if you're in a group. But I'd say it's even more effective to go support as Warcry because it synergizes with Warcry itself. Warcry is AoE physical damage, and all it really requires is plus skills in FCR, kind of just like Teeth. And both of these builds, by the way, especially double throw, you can do even earlier with you can destroy Travancore with it. But with Warcry, you can also destroy Travancore, and you can do a lot of damage to them, and they will die very fast. And then you can use Item Find, which is literally the best way to use a Barbarian early game. If you're just playing solo, just farm the crap out of Travancore. That's all you have to do. Or sit behind people mapping or running chaos and hork everything. That's one way with Item Find. Just use Item Find on all the corpses. Even get heart carvers or magic find swaps when you're using Item Find. It's really effective. And these support builds, you can use support in any scenario. It's very good for a group battle orders, especially. And battle cry, just reducing enemy physical res. These support abilities like battle cry, even without amp, are going to lower physical res a lot and allow you to do a ton of damage, even without a lot of items. So really going hard on those approaches is really good. And Warcry can flatten things from the get-go very fast. High AoE physical damage with even the ability to lower physical res from the very beginning. So very strong approaches, Warcry and Double Throw. Double Throw just might be a bit safer, which is why I would put that pick as number 1 and this pick as number 2, focusing on Warcry. So Barbarian can be a very good starter, but I definitely recommend just starting with those two builds. Unless you have gear kind of already ready to go, if you're just starting out with nothing, those are going to be your best approaches, no doubt. And even with gear, I'd like to emphasize, even with gear, they're still arguably the strongest approaches in a Barbarian, so you really can't go wrong with those builds. Alright, anyway. Assassin. Alright, Assassin number 1, Wake of Fire. Wake of Fire is really strong. It does some serious damage without a lot of maintenance or without a lot of skills. Hell Cows will definitely go down with Wake of Fire, and you can use supplementary damage in the form of Fire Blast or even Shockweb if you want another element. It's really strong. It's safe. You can do it from a back. You can do things like Stony Tombs. You can do Maggot Lair. There's a lot of good areas you can do with this. Honestly, if you just want to sit in cows, Wake of Fire is just such a strong approach, and it's even very strong in the late game, of course. Of course, the main weakness is that it's primarily fire damage, which means that you can't do everything, but it's very fast and solid clear on an assassin. I was kind of like, trying to figure out in my head like where I should order a lot of these assassin builds in terms of my order of picks. Assassin's one of those ones you can really make good arguments for like different of these starter builds being in different locations. But I don't know. I kind of did my best because there's just a lot of different tasks you can do with the assassin, and these abilities all have different strengths and weaknesses. So, like, let's go over my number two pick, Mind Blast Psychic Hammer, which in a lot of people's minds might even be the number one pick. Why? Because you can kill everything with it, and I mean everything. It's got physical and magic damage to supplement it with Psychic Hammer. Um, so it's really, really crazy reliable stuff. It's really, really insane. Mind Blast Psychic Hammer. You can clear all of hell. The one weakness, though, is without some plus skills, it can take a little bit to kill things. But that being said, because it has such good AoE, you can still pop cows with it. You can run Chaos early on, and you can run the Pit. It's solid. It's solid. You can do whatever you want because it literally can kill everything. Magic and physical damage combined, it literally has like no weaknesses in terms of immunities, almost virtually none. So that's one of the major strengths of that approach. But see, you could also put this ahead of Mind Blast too. I mean, maybe Mind Blast Psychic Hammer is a number three approach, and maybe this is a number two approach because Chain Lightning Lightning Sentry, once again, with an Act 3 Mercenary and Static Field, can apply huge negative enemy lightning res debuff to all the monsters around you, and you can shred the pit. You can do all kinds of things. You can shred arcane, just like with the other lightning builds, and it's very, very reliable. It's very reliable from the early game, and it's very safe, just like Wake of Fire. There's just different areas that it's strong at clearing, unlike cows. Probably not the best approach for Hell Cows, but it's going to be strong for those other early game areas, even without a lot of plus skills. And I like to emphasize, I mean, you can definitely get, you can put Crescent Moon and a Claw as well to get negative enemy light res very early on this build. Just like you can wear things like Frostburns to get negative enemy fire res on Wake of Fire, or even like Rising Sun once you can acquire that, even though that's not as easy to acquire, or Akira's and things of that nature. So you can see there's a lot of potential early game for a lot of these assassin builds. There's a lot of assassin builds I feel like that work pretty well early game. Claws of Thunder also works very well for similar reasons that Chain Lightning and Lightning Sentry does with the Act 3 Static Field Mercenary, once again, the Lightning Mercenary. Um, but with Claws of Thunder, you can even go. You can just wreck stuff with. You can even go daggers, so you can go claws and daggers. You can go Storm Spike even, which is not very hard to find. You can also go that on Chain Lightning Lightning Sentry. Heck, you can go that on Lightning Chain Lightning Sorceress. There's just a lot of really good early game options now for lightning builds. In Claws of Thunder, you might think, yeah, it's a little more dangerous than Chain Lightning Lightning Sentry, which is true, but it does a lot of damage. And you can clear Arcane and Pit with it very early as well with all that negative lightning res. It's pretty easily accessible early game with that Crescent Moon, Act 3 Mercenary, Storm Spike. There's a lot of options for sure. Very good stuff in general. And then there's Phoenix Strike. Phoenix Strike, which really makes Phoenix Strike pop, is its ability to have all elements. So if you're dealing with heavy lightning resistance, this is when some of these like pure element builds suffer like heavy fire resistance. Phoenix Strike though isn't as crazy as it used to be. It got nerfed a lot. Uh, it's definitely way stronger with things like Kira's and Infinity now. It definitely has way more safety as well in that regard. But you can still freeze. It's got good safety, it's got good damage, and it has all three elements. So you can definitely clear the end game with this very reliably. Pretty much do whatever you want. Is it going to be insanely fast though? Probably not. Probably going to want to at least get some gear on it, but it can clear the game, and it has no elemental weaknesses, virtually none because of that. So I did put it on here as an honorable mention as a number 5 pick because it's pretty strong for that approach. And then, of course, last but not least, Paladin, which has arguably also one of the strongest starting builds, period, arguably out of all the classes. Which, once again, it's really hard to rank the strongest starters from each class because they're all super effective in different scenarios. I mean, obviously, the Sorceress teleport with boss farming is a big advantage still in the early game, and then things that give consistent teleport like Blood Warp and Gust are definitely going to be very good for mobility. But you know, if you're just farming cows, freezing arrow is going to be insane too, and cows is a very, good farm for runes, charms, gems, jewels, jewelry, bases, and even for all kinds of items. So it just depends on kind of what you're going for. And yeah, high rune's very good in there, so it just depends. And however, Fist of the Heavens is incredible. Fist of the Heavens is AoE magic damage, kind of like Teeth, but it does even more single target damage because of the lightning damage as well that is applied to the single target that is applied near your cursor. So that's where the Fist of the Heavens lands. It's got such improved AI now. It's got way better usage. It's way cleaner to use this ability. You can spam it based on your faster cast rate. Plus skills, just really insane. Heck, you can even do declin with it on a budget. Um, it's it's pretty crazy, and in a group, it's really easy to justify maxing out Conviction even, which is the best grouping aura for lowering all those monsters' resistances, especially in mapping. And of course, it'll help out your own single target, the damage where the Fist of the Heavens initially lands. It won't help the Holy Bolts, but the Holy Bolts are mostly help with plus skills. You could go any aura you want, pretty much, any support aura, even Redemption just for yourself if you really want to. But of course, if you want to kill Diablo faster, you might want to go Conviction because of that additional lightning damage from the initial landing point. So it just depends on what you're doing. Farms Chaos extremely well. It can farm things uh, like the Pit extremely well. It can farm Trav, very, very strong. Very good stuff. It can do pretty much the whole game. Very strong starter approach. If you want to play Paladin, um, you almost don't have to look any further. This is like definitely the strongest approach for a starter, no doubt. Kind of like, there's some pretty clear advantages for Necro Summon right now. But that being said, I know I wanted to give people some variety. So, maybe they don't like these number one picks. Maybe they want to do something different. Maybe they don't like the number two picks either. Maybe they want, something a little different. That being said, you can play almost any build in the game as a starter in Project Diablo 2. I'd love to um, emphasize that. You can literally play any build in the game, um, and you can't go wrong. But anyways, Holy Bolt used to be the very best starter for a Paladin. It is still very strong, despite all the nerfs. It does still shotgun, so it's still very powerful. And it still clears Chaos, it still clears Travancore. It's a very good build to start out with. It's magic damage, it's AoE, you can clear lots of things, and it heals. So the healing is a bit more reliable. So if you want more targeted healing, a more focused Holy Bolt approach would be nice. But to be honest, Holy Bolt is, it's in with the synergies with Fist of the Heavens, so it's not a totally different build necessarily. You don't have to. There are different items that cater to it a little bit more, but you can kind of just combine this approach as well with Fist of the Heavens and just have it on a hotkey as well. So you can do both, but if you want to main this approach, I would say it's my number two pick as a main approach. And then number three pick, Holy Shock. Holy Shock is very solid. Holy Shock is insanely solid, and it's going to be really good stuff. Once again, with the Act 3 Mercenary, breaking those lightning immunes is very effective, and you can use Joust to reposition your Mercenary. The only problem is Act 3 Mercenaries die in close combat, so you might want to be careful with that. But yeah, you can get a lot of very easy to get. Lightsaber is a great, powerful weapon for early game, and it's not even that rare or hard to acquire. Um, Once again, of course, you can also do Crescent Moon. There are other options for starting out, and it's going to be very powerful, even without a ton of insane gear. Um, it's very strong, does a lot of damage. Of course, if you want something that can kill more monsters reliably because it's not just lightning damage, you can go the magic damage dealer. And the magic damage dealer, its main advantage is that it's magic damage, so it can clear pretty much all content in the early game. So that's why I give it an honorable mention. The clear speed's not going to be insane, but it's solid. It's very solid, and it clears everything, and it can be very safe if you get that max block and get some decent shields, decent res paladin shields going and whatnot. Sanctuaries is very good. Very, very good. Yeah, Sanctuary Zealer, I've actually started this approach before, so it's very good. It can clear pretty much everything. It can kill everything. You can just start doing chaos You can start doing Travancore once you have at least some res. So yeah, it's a very good starter for sure. I think it's underrated, and a lot of people don't appreciate that as much of a starter as it maybe should be. But it's a very solid starter, so that's why I put it there for an honorable mention. All right, well, there you go. You have my 1 through whatever picks on each of the classes. If you want to play an Amazon, at least you'll kind of know what you're getting into. These are definitely very strong starting approaches for different reasons. I kind of talked about why I think they're strong starting approaches and maybe some of the areas they can be good at farming in a lot of the cases. And yeah, just as even as LOD, as early group mapping supports, things of that nature. You could arguably put other builds in here. Let me know in the comments section below if you feel like I absolutely just botched it by missing one. A build you feel like is a super powerful starter that people should pay more attention to as a starter. But also keep in mind that you could start with any build in Project Diablo 2 that you want. Anything is viable as a starter. Even Poison Strike, which is Poison Dagger, it's just the new Poison Dagger. Especially with the early game items, a lot of those really cheap throwaway gear can make any of these things viable in early hell or otherwise. One thing to also mention though is that in hardcore, some of your stronger approaches are going to be a little bit different. With Energy Shield, you can definitely survive just fine in hardcore on any of these Sorceress builds. Wind Druid might be a little more dangerous starting in hardcore, but just means you don't tele stomp directly, you just kind of get near them. Single target or corridors, Tornado is stronger, and then Twister, you take out a lot of monsters in AoE, even in Chaos, so you stand a little bit farther back. And then, of course, you'd prioritize different mercenaries like Defiance Mercenary, which grants percent and flat DR from the get-go on hardcore. So it just, there's different approaches. Freezing Arrow would hands down be best on hardcore, even more so than it already is on softcore. And same thing with like Summon on the Necromancer. And maybe even like Double Throw, even more so. There's a bit more pronounced things. Mind Blast and Psychic Hammer might be a slightly better approach on hardcore, maybe, because it can kill more monsters and you can stand even further back, and you can kind of stun and whatnot. It's just good stuff. It's good for like putting them in hit recovery, and yeah, there's just there's a lot of things you can consider, of course, and then of course but overall, I rank them, not just with softcore in mind. I mean, this is mostly softcore in mind. This is definitely a heavy softcore focus, even as a hardcore player. But I mean, some of these number ones aren't just number one in softcore; they're also number one in hardcore, and there's a reason because they're just super effective builds. But then again, in hardcore, maybe you'd rather run Summon Druid though, because it's safer, because you can just let the summons kill things. So yeah, I mean, there are some differences for sure. But overall, I'd say, very strong approaches no matter what you do. And yeah, just let me know in the comments below, once again, if you think I absolutely missed any of them. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you really like this starter guide. Try to make this one under an hour, just talking about these different approaches and my reasoning. Of course, if you think I have flawed reasoning, though, it's just fine. Like I said, some of these are very rough rankings, and it's just kind of based on my general assessment of how good the build is, how much it can do starting out without gear. Hardcore or softcore, really. Not really just taking only hardcore into account or whatever. So there's definitely some room for arguments for sure. There's definitely room for arguments, but of course, just let me know what you guys think. Let me know if it helped you choose a character to start with in Project Diablo 2. And of course, give me a like and subscribe in the video if you enjoyed listening to this overview and thought this was very helpful. Remember, we'll also link my Season 4 PD2 late game tier list, which now also has these recommended starter builds in it, in the description below and in the first pinned comment, so you guys can, of course, access this starter lineup as well. And I hope this helps you, maybe inspires you to choose maybe a new build this weekend coming up. Anyways, let's get it. Let's go. You can always catch me at twitch.tv/Dark Humility. Also catch the timestamps in the description as well. And let's go. Dark Humility. Over and out. Till next time. Until more awesome guides and more awesome information. I do it all for the love of the community, so Hope you guys learned something here today and you can apply that knowledge and become a pro. Smash it. Let's get it.